All right, so we're starting this little series off. I'm not sure what to title it just yet, but I can't think of a better person to start it off with than my friend, my former client, Jennifer Hawkrigg, who's an unbelievable athlete and one of my favorite people to hang out with and talk to. So welcome to the show, whatever it is, Jennifer.
Thank you so much. Yeah, let's get into it.
Okay, so part of what I want to do with this is for it to be a casual conversation between us. So as I mentioned, Jennifer was a client of mine, but that's far from the accomplishments that matter most of hers. She was also an Olympic athlete, and is someone who I've known since she was, what was it, 14, 15 years old when we
Yeah.
started training. And we took that journey together all the way through to the Olympics. So she's got a lot to share. And one of the things that I want to do with this little segment is kind of get into the mindset of an athlete and sort of dial into one of the little psychological tips and tricks that they might use throughout competition, out of competition, and sort of how they structure their life around competition to really maximize their potential in and out of sport. So I guess we'll start with asking you, when did snowboarding become something that you not just competed in, but kind of thought that, the Olympics is a goal that I genuinely want to chase here?
Yeah, I think it was pretty young. Like, I feel like my whole life was sort of centered around sport from a very young age. I think my dreams of the Olympics started very young just because like my passion for sport is really what drove me from like a very young age. And it also drove me to do a bunch of different sports. So I feel like when I was younger, I knew about the Olympics. I was so passionate about the Olympics, but maybe not necessarily what sport I would actually make it in. But I think like one of my earliest memories of actually realizing that the Olympics could be realistic was probably when like I wrote that letter to myself in grade 7. And I mentioned the Olympics and I mentioned that like that was my dream, but I might not make it one day. So I feel like that's like my earliest like memory of being like, I love snowboarding. Snowboarding is the sport that I'm going to pursue. And then also just having maybe like older athletes who I looked up to on my snowboard race team who were sort of meeting the international level and seeing them go to the Olympics. I think that's really when like it became a realistic dream for me. And then at such an early age, I asked my parents at 12 if I could like move to the States to go to a snowboard school. So I clearly took it pretty seriously, pretty young, and I wrote it on paper. So I think that was really when like the dream became alive.
You touched on so many, in just a short little story, you touched on so many little important elements and things that make your journey and the success of your journey so accessible. I think a lot of times what people struggle with is, at least when they're trying to relate to athletes at the highest level, is it seems like what you guys do is such an entire world away from what the average person like you is doing in this world. And in a lot of ways, obviously it is. You guys are performing at such a high level, and that's not something that everyone can do, and there's a reason why it's special. But I think at the end of the day, when you break it down, a lot of the ways that you got there are very much accessible and things that people can apply to their day-to-day, both from a physical perspective and from a psychological perspective. But take me back again to 7-year-old JJ, because that's pretty incredible. That's rare to have someone who at that age is, I think you had written down that it probably won't happen. I want to go to the Olympics, but it probably won't happen. So was there ever a time thereafter from 7-year-old JJ to now, or at least in your competitive career, where there were almost two sides of you where you were asking yourself, like, this is what I want to do and how I want to get there, or this is what I need to do, but there's still this kind of doubt that I have to deal with that I don't think I could make it there? Was that something that you struggled with or at least dealt with throughout your career?
Yeah, I feel like I struggled with that a lot. I don't know if it's just me or if that's like to do with a lot of athletes, but I think for me, I just was always like realistic about things. And I looked at things in a way of like, realizing that I am not the most talented snowboarder in the world. Like, I knew that from a young age, but I wanted to be able to make my dreams come true in terms of work ethic and just being able to sacrifice and all the things that go into becoming an Olympic athlete. I knew that if I really was dedicated and I really was open to learning and improving, that hopefully my dream will come true. But there's so many adversities along the way that until I was like at the Olympics, I really did not know if I was going to be there or not. Like there were so many things out of my control that goes into being selected to the Olympics, even if you do everything that you can to make it there. Um, there's a lot of circumstances that you can't control. So for me, I just really tried, like especially in those 2 years leading into the games when it was the Olympic qualification, like you always are so focused on the end goal, and that was obviously qualifying for the Olympics. I think it really overshadowed just being in the moment and focusing on like the race that day. That, and understandably, it's like you've been working your entire life to make it to the Olympics. It obviously like is an overbearing weight on your shoulders. But sort of looking back now, like I obviously wish that I just had focused on the day and focused on the races and all those leading up to the games, because I think I would have performed better, just not trying to control the outcome and just trying to control that day. So I think there were a lot of doubts leading into it just because I only knew I was going to the games 5 days before I went there. So it was like a pretty crazy 2 years. And even before that, you always have those hard months of snowboarding where I was like, why am I even doing this? And questioning it when things weren't going well. Um, so yeah, I think it's just sort of taking it step by step and looking at it as hard as it can be with an optimistic lens that things do happen for a reason. And even through those injuries and everything like that, it did work out at the end.
Yeah, that's amazing. I think there's a cool lesson in there, and that like that lesson of appreciating the process isn't something that you ever necessarily totally learn to the point where you're just applying that to everything that you do. Because as you said, every time you level up and get to that next stage, you know that you got there because of this appreciation of the process and the hard work and all the things that go into not necessarily being outcome oriented. But then when you get to that next stage, it's like, okay, like now what do I have to do? Like, okay, I need to get this outcome. I need to be this good. I need to get this time. I need to whatever it is. So it's pretty interesting that even with an appreciation of it, you can still sort of, for lack of a better term, get lost in this idea of, focusing on the outcome. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I think,
Mhm.
everyone's got their different path and different methods of doing it, but I appreciate you sharing that. That's awesome. The next question I would have is, did any of the skills you learned there, did you find that you applied throughout your career? Did you find that you applied them outside of sporting competition?
I think there are a lot of lessons that really like translate into real life, I would say. And I've only really started realizing that over the past few months as I've retired and made my way into my professional career. And I think there are also a lot of things that I learned from my athletic career that actually really don't help me for real life, as I would like to say. Um,
What are some
but
of those?
some I'll start with some of them that translate. I think no matter what you're doing, even if you're an athlete, working, etc., I think hard work goes a long way. And just being dedicated to what you're putting majority of your time to. I think that's such an amazing um, just trait to have in life. And I think sport really builds that for you. So I see that now, like in my job now, that like there's going to be times where a lot of work is going to be needed and there's going to be hard work, and just trying to stay motivated through those times, because even though it's different goals, it is really fulfilling when you finish a project or meet your deadline, things like that. And so I think a lot of things I learned in snowboarding was stress management and multitasking a lot of things at once, like I was doing during my career with school, work, and being a professional snowboarder. So I think those skills I learned have been super, super beneficial, and have translated really well.
So what did that actually look like when you were doing school work? I mean, we've had this conversation before, but for my,
Yeah.
all sorts of my fans watching this, what did it look
Mhm.
like to actually be able to do, like, how do you get school work done when you're competing, when you're not just competing, but also flying around the world,
Yeah.
competing in different time zones and also working a part-time job? What does that look like?
Like, honestly, thinking back to it now, I actually don't know how I did it. So I'm like, it's pretty crazy to think of, but it was a lot of time management and also prioritizing, I would say, just because I was on a different time zone. I was training from like 8 till 12 to 1 every day.
Yeah.
And when some people were able to just relax in their afternoon, I was either studying for an exam, getting a project done, and then on top of that, also working my part-time job. Um, so it was really just like, yeah, really time management, also like a lot of stress management because there were times that was really stressful and I was like, why did I put so much stuff on my plate? But also realizing that like I wanted to do that and I wanted to prioritize preparing myself for life after snowboarding. And I knew that was really important to me. And that was my priority, was ensuring I got my education, as well as when I retired, I had sort of a resume to fall on, as well as connections to sort of start this next phase of my career. So I think when you are really passionate about something, which I was, about all three aspects that I was doing, that obviously really helps in like how many hours you're putting into it. Um, but also looking back, I realized that I probably shouldn't have put so much on my plate and also pressure on myself to be excelling in three things that some people just focus all of their time on, where I was trying to succeed in all three. And there was definitely times where my snowboarding was not benefiting from me staying up super late, not being able to sort of rest and recover in the afternoons after training, or even getting on a flight back from Europe for 2 days to take an exam and then flying back. Like, I know there were definitely times where it hurt my snowboarding. So sometimes I wish maybe I was a bit more patient with myself and realized that it's okay to focus on one thing and then focus on the next maybe after my career. But I wouldn't change it, just because I think it did make me a lot stronger and it made me sort of prepared for the real world a little bit better.
Yeah, that's amazing. So you weren't just managing present JJ at the time, you're managing future JJ and what she's doing outside of the
Mhm.
sport. So that's good for you. That's not that self-awareness is something that, not a lot of people lack, but maybe they're just not in tune with and not something
Yeah.
they have experience with. So for you to do that at a young age is pretty incredible. Tell me more about what you're doing today with your job. Is it at all related to sport?
Yeah, for sure. Just because sport is something that I realize that really I obviously am passionate about, and I want to continue making an impact in the sport space, and the Olympic space. I sort of geared the work I did. I worked with RBC for 3 years on their Olympic sponsorship team. And sort of through that experience, I realized that this is a space I would want to be in. And then more recently with Deloitte, still working in that space of partnering or managing their partnership with the Canadian Olympic Committee, but also taking on more of a consulting role where we're actually shaping sport strategy in Canada and um, actually making an impact with national sport organizations, the COC, as well as the International Olympic Committee. So being able to sort of take my experience that I learned in sport, and bring the lens of an athlete of where things are lacking in the sports system or in safe sport, and being able to actually make a difference is really made, I think, retirement and made this transition from being an athlete to sort of the other side of sport, has made it a bit more seamless for me, for sure.
That's amazing. You have such a unique perspective that having competed at such a high level and now, doing all these things to help others compete at a high level as well. Take me
Yeah.
through the selection process for the Olympic that year, because I know it was something that we went back and forth with, and just the moment that you think it's not there, all of a sudden
Yeah.
there's an opportunity, which I think very, very much characterizes a lot of your strengths as a person and as an athlete. So take me through that.
Yeah. For my sport, at least, it started 2 years before Beijing. So, um, 2 years of approximately 8 to 10 World Cups in a year to qualify for the games. Um, Sort of a complex system, but basically comes down to the top 32 best snowboarders in the world going to the games. But on top of that, there's international criteria to meet, but there's also Canadian criteria to meet. Um, and so throughout my time, I met this international criteria. I opened a quota spot, but then it actually went in the hands of my sport organization to which is pretty crazy. It goes into the hands of a few people to basically decide your fate if you're going to go to the games or not go to the games, which is pretty scary and pretty touch and go up until I found out, just because a few people can decide what you've been working for your entire life and
Yeah.
dedicate 25 years to. Um, so yeah, it was honestly terrifying, and I don't think I like really believed it was going to happen for a very, very long time. And obviously, thankfully, the decision went in the favor of what we deserved and what we worked for, and that we did open Olympic quota spots. So, but yeah, just a scary, very scary situation, I would say.
Amazing that you have to kind of allow that to kind of hang in the balance for as long as it did. And I'm sure as much as it was a lifetime going into it, which feels so long, that
Mhm.
day or two where it was kind of hanging in the balance might have felt like the longest period of that time too.
Yeah.
Um, so tell you were talking a little bit about your stress management strategies throughout, and that you were balancing so much. And I know a lot of times people talk about this idea of balance in terms of work-life balance and whatnot.
Mhm.
I think sometimes, there's something to be said for what you touched on earlier, which is it does balance really, is this question, does balance really exist in that work-life balance kind of philosophy, or is it really that sometimes there's a lot more work to be done and there's sacrifice on the personal side and vice versa when you take time for yourself? And is that, whole process in and of itself a balance, or is it just an appreciation for the ups and downs that characterize this kind of a process as a whole? So tell me a little bit about specifically maybe some of the stress management strategies that you used. Was it just simply a recognition of I can't do everything right now, I need to focus on X? Or was there like a little mantra that you used or some kind of self-talk, or what was it?
Yeah, I feel like it's tough to like put into maybe a mantra or what I actually did to sort of get through those 5 years. Because truthfully, I don't think I really know how I got through those 5 years, being honest. Um, I think it was a situation of sort of I threw myself into the situation and I really needed to learn by experiencing all the stuff I put on my plate and the stress I brought on. Um, and I think it also was something that came with time, and that sadly I needed to sort of learn stress management skills, I would say like a little bit late. Like looking back when I started getting into snowboarding more intensely when I was 16, I was snowboarding. I was obviously still in high school, and then I was obviously like applying for university, things like that, which are obviously stressful situations. But I think at that time, there's like, I just love snowboarding. And I didn't really think about like, I needed to meet certain goals or like criterias or things like that, just because I was loving it. And with loving it and being so passionate about it, I just was like excelling really well in snowboarding. And I was obviously just young. So I feel like I didn't take on maybe the stress as much as I did when I got older. And then when I got older and I decided to make snowboarding my entire life, there's obviously a lot more risk with that, especially when maybe things aren't going well. You're like, why am I dedicating my entire life to snowboarding if I'm not improving or not reaching the goals I want to? And there's so much more stress that comes with it that it honestly sort of starts like chipping away at the love you have for the sport. And then you put school and then you put work on top of it. And so for me, a lesson I learned was I wish I sort of started focusing on my mental health as well as like ways to manage the stress a lot earlier and like getting those foundations. Whereas I sort of started focusing on it when it was maybe a bit too late, when I was in a bit of a crisis mode and I was just struggling so much mentally because I had all the stress on my shoulders. Um, that it was negatively affecting my grades, my snowboarding, things like that, just because I had so much stress on a day-to-day base. Um, and that's when I really started focusing on it, like getting a sports psychologist, things like that. And that really helped, especially over the past couple years of just consistently making that a part of my routine, and just sort of like growing resilience, I would say, to these stresses. And I think these stresses eventually became a routine for me where like I had my training and then I put set like time away for school work, and then I used to never do this, but then I actually put like time away for fun and rest and things like that. And that really made like a huge difference. Just being able to like take 30 minutes to go on a walk or things like that, which seems so small, but when like 12 hours of your day are taken for like your mind's on 100% or your body's being tested physically, I just really got into a routine of setting time aside every day to like focus or do something that didn't have anything to do with any three of those aspects. And honestly, a big part of that was the gym. I think the gym honestly saved me mentally over the past 10 years because it was just a way of consistently forgetting about everything and just making me feel so much better.
That's amazing. I think there's such a cool lesson in that. You said that so well. Because as I alluded to earlier, oftentimes these clips of like athletes at your level training in the gym, throwing around heavy weights, it seems so far away. But really when you chip it, when you sort of break it down, it really is just one small session at a time. You weren't always doing the things that you were doing right before the Olympics. When you and I first started when you were 14, 15 years old, we were throwing a little med ball, like a 2 pound med ball back and forth, right? And just learning how to warm up, learning how to move in the gym. Before you know it, you're squatting, you're doing things like cleans, and you're doing all these fancy, cool exercises with big, heavy weights. But you never get there without these kind of small process little jumps, which seems so, intuitive. Everyone gets that. But I think when it comes to the psychological side, like that's the physical side of it. When you look at the psychological side, this overwhelming sensation, these anxieties that we have, it feels so very much akin to that like power cleans and heavy front squats. It's so like, holy shit, what's going on here? But
Yeah.
at the end of the day, how do you get out of that? How do you get out of those symptoms of anxiety? Is simple little tasks like going for a walk, dedicating time to yourself. So appreciate
Mhm.
you sharing that. That's awesome. And then the last question I have for you, mostly because I'm going to get kicked off of Zoom here because I haven't paid for an upgrade, but so you spoke about kind of your stress management strategies as a whole, which is awesome. In getting a sports psychologist and recognizing that you can't do it all at the highest level all the time. At some
Yeah.
point, you have to kind of push and pull. So what about in competition? Because I think that's something that's always interesting for me as someone who's not a competitive athlete, although I compete at an amateur level and little things here and there. To be in your shoes, what is it like in the middle of competition when something's not going well, when you had a run that didn't go well, or
Mhm.
pre-competition and post-competition? So pre, mid, and post, are there little things that you're telling yourself, certain things that you're looking for? What was your routine like?
Yeah, I for sure am a person of routine. I feel like if I did my routine every race day, I just knew that that was like a checked box that I didn't have to think about like in the start gate when your body is already like filled with so much adrenaline and a bit of a fight or flight stage. So for me, routine was something that was so important for me to be successful on race day. Being like physically ready as well as mentally ready, physically going through my like entire warm up that we would do in the gym together, and making sure that my body felt good because it's obviously very important to be able to perform to the highest level. And then mentally sort of had my things like listening to music when I felt maybe overly stressed, or if I didn't feel sort of excited enough, like usually leaning into music to prepare myself, and really getting into the zone. I think it's easy to get distracted, especially at the top of the hill, and there's so many people around, and there's obviously the stressors of performing. But for me, I think it was just like doing my routine mentally and physically, and then also like even the night before just looking at video of things that I want to do well and maybe like thinking about a couple cues from training that helped me have a successful run. That's sort of what I would focus on, especially in the start gate, like just two things, not to like overbear my brain, but just be like, think about these two things. But then it also is really up to trusting the process, and trusting the work you put in before race day. I think you perform the best if you feel like you're prepared to perform the best. Obviously, you might have off days where you didn't feel great and you performed well, but I think for me, in order for me to be right on race day, I want to make sure that I did everything in my power to be prepared for that day. So taking maximizing my time in training, ensuring my body was good, ensuring I felt the strongest I could every single year, and putting in a lot of work in the off season. So there's like years of work that go into this one race day. So that's how I was sort of able to ease my stress and anxiety, is knowing that I worked the hardest I could in the gym that summer. I was working hard in training, things like that. And then just really doing the best I could the day of.
I can attest to that firsthand, your work ethic in the gym and little Zoom calls here and there when there was a little injury and kind of taking care of things on the fly, but really putting that work in on the front end to make sure that those moments are minimized when they do come.
Yeah.
I think you might actually be, I don't know if you know this, you might actually be the only athlete I ever, do you remember I had to send you home because you were like, you were almost so dedicated that you came in on a day where you were so sick, like pale, you crawled your way into the gym. I looked over,
Yeah.
I'm like, what happened? Like, it's Wednesday, there's no way, like, she's dedicated, she could go out on a Tuesday, she's not one of their parties, like, what's going on here? And you were like, I feel so terrible. What are we doing today? I'm like, you need to go home and take a nap, drink some water, I don't know, have some Campbell's chicken noodle soup or something, but
Yeah.
it's not happening. You might be the only person I've ever done that to. Real quick before we leave, you mentioned music. Can you share one or two of the tunes or artists that you leaned on in your competition?
Oh boy. Honestly, this is gonna sound so weird because some people like really focus on pump up music,
Yeah.
but I got like overly anxious that I actually had to listen to like slow, soothing
Oh, cool.
songs so that I could like actually think of my thoughts and like bring actually my levels down, or else
Yeah.
I'd be like way too fired up. So it's so lame, but I would honestly listen to like John Mayer and things like that. That would like not get me too excited, because I think just naturally I got like a lot of adrenaline before race day.
Yeah, there you go. Whatever works, right? Like, that's awesome. Again, that speaks to the self-awareness and knowing yourself and not just following in the other's footsteps, but finding what works for you. All right,
Yeah,
JJ, appreciate this. I'm gonna stop the recording now, but appreciate
awesome.
you. Chat soon.
Thank you so much.